Hey everybody, this is Tristan from I really need a new way to introduce these videos. It's no time for that now. There's videos to make. So, this is the second content video of this channel, and already there are over 100 of you, which is quite impressive. I'm literally blown away by this. So I actually got my first request down in the comments on the halfling video to talk about Nagas. And so today we're going to do a little bit of a video monster manual to talk about Nagas. I guess to start we should go with the real world. Naga is a Sanskrit word for snake. Very often in the Dharmic religions, Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism, they're portrayed as spiritual guardians or cobra that are always cobras. They're sort of a semi-divine race that exists within Hindu mythology. And sometimes they turn themselves into humans or as semi-human, semi-snake creatures or just full-on giant cobras. They come from a Hindu version of the underworld, at least in Hindu mythology, a place where there's lots of gems and minerals and things like that. They're like lords of the underworld, typically called Naga Loka. Typically, you'll see in depictions of the god Shiva, you'll find around his neck there will be a snake, and that is usually depicted as a Naga. And like the Hindus like to do with appendages, sometimes Nagas can be depicted as having multiple heads. Buddhists can portray them either as snakes or as dragons. There's actually one famous story of a Naga who decided he wanted to become a monk but could not because only humans could become monks, so the Buddha himself sort of gave him permission to be reincarnated in his next life as a human so that he could become a monk. Nagas are considered servants of the god Virupaksha. I know I probably butchered that. I'm not a Sanskrit expert, I'm sorry. But one of the sort of divine lords of the heavens who protects devas, who are a creature in D&D as well. So maybe you can pair them up for an adventure. And they're protected from attacks from things called the Asuras. And these elements show up in all sorts of Southeast Asian mythology, in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Cambodia, in Vietnam. Nagas show up over and over again as river spirits, water spirits. The Laotians actually believe that the Naga is the divine protector of Laos, but there are regular festivals to the Nagas that happen in places like Vietnam because they're considered the divine protectors of all of the waterways. In places like the Angkor Wat, you'll actually see depictions of Nagas, these like cobra statues that are all over the place. Because of their mythological importance, they show up in a lot of Bollywood films as sort of these fantasy creatures. So let's talk a little bit about how they show up in Dungeons and Dragons. They're intelligent creatures, they're aberrations, which means that they are some sort of otherworldly creature with some sort of strange alien mind. Until 5th edition, I believe they were mostly depicted as snakes with a human head. Kind of a shout out to Matt Colville, because I know that one of his favorite adventures to run is a adventure called Against the Cult of the Reptile God, and a Naga named Explicita Defilis is the reptile god in that story. So if you were interested in what Matt Colville was talking about, the bad guy is a Naga. In 5th edition, they're more intelligent serpents that have been charged by some sort of divine creator figure to be rulers over different types of people. There are 3 that you get in the monster manual. One is a bone Naga that is a Naga that has been resurrected or has been killed and reanimated as an undead by a yuan-ti ritual. We'll talk about the yuan-ti in a second. And then there are 2 other Nagas, one that are good and one that are sort of evil, and it depends upon what kind of ruler they are. The Monster Manual says that they accumulate treasure and they have an interest in magical research and accumulating magical items, especially related to their long-lost progenitor race. They also have a lifelong rivalry and enmity towards the yuan-ti, who are a race of humanoids that sort of made an evil pact with their serpent gods to become snake monsters. They used to be a powerful empire, and the Naga are partially responsible for the yuan-ti's downfall. We'll talk about that more when we actually do a yuan-ti video. And as I mentioned, the yuan-ti can perform a ritual on a Naga. Nagas are actually immortal, but they can perform a ritual on a captured Naga to turn it into an undead bone Naga. Then there are guardian Nagas, which are benevolent protectors that could definitely be your friend in a situation. And then there are spirit Nagas, which are malevolent, iron fist authoritarian Nagas. Guardian Nagas are said to be wise and good and live in protected places, and they kind of guard important places in the world. Usually they're trying to research spells in order to thwart the evils that threaten the planet. Spirit Nagas are a different story. They are creatures of spitefulness. They live in gloomy, dark places, caves, ruins, things like that, and are trying to enslave as many people as possible and exact revenge on those that they feel have wronged them. So let's talk a little bit about settings. Now, unlike halflings, because halflings, are a playable race, Nagas don't show up as much in the other settings. There's a few details we can talk about. So the Forgotten Realms, they do have the human face, and they're a little bit more known for being evil and preferring to eat the flesh of humanoids like orcs and elves and dwarves and all that kind of thing. They also have a progenitor race in the Forgotten Realms, but the yuan-ti have the same progenitor race. It's a dead reptilian race called the Saruk, and they use things called memory gems, which are these magical items where you can encase memories into little jewels that they can use to save things for each other. There's also a few more varieties that if you were to make for your own Forgotten Realms settings, you'd have to adapt for 5th edition. There's like the shiny iridescent Naga, there's water Naga, and some Naga sorcerers, although Naga in the Monster Manual would be pretty fine on that because they have a lot of spells already. In Dragonlance, they're actually typically considered good creatures, and sometimes the lords of wayward races like a group of goblins or something like that. The only reference to Nagas in Eberron that I could find is that there is a Naga that rules over a tribe of lizard folk, and in the Planescape setting, they actually live on Mount Celestia, which is one of the good afterlives. Actually, I think it's the goodest of afterlives. It's the lawful good afterlife. And they're constantly hunted by these large birds called the Garuda. In Galarian, the Pathfinder setting, they're sometimes derogatorily called worm folk, and they do have that snake with a human head look, and there's all sorts of places they show up. There's water ones, there's underground ones, there's guardian ones. They have all sorts of varieties of Naga in the setting. There's just nothing especially special about them, at least until I get my hands on a Pathfinder bestiary. They're also not mentioned much in the Exandria setting, the Critical Role setting, although they do make one appearance, and it is in the first episode of Critical Role. So Kavarn, the Elder Brain that is the first bad guy of the first arc of the Critical Role campaign, the first battle of Critical Role is a fight against a mutated, multi-headed Naga that was created by that Elder Brain. I think that was the one that was killed by Crotch Lightning on behalf of Scanlan, so it was iconic, but that is really the only time a Naga has ever shown up in all of the Critical Role setting, and in the Tal'Dorei sourcebook, there's no mention of Nagas at all. In the Elder Scrolls series in Tamriel, they're a subspecies of Argonian that are native to the Argonian native province of Blackmarsh. They're made to look a little bit like puff adders. So they've got black scales, black eyes, lots of fangs, that kind of thing. They have a reputation of being thugs who are like the source of crime within Argonian culture. And they're things like, raiders, marauders, drug dealers, things like that. In the Blizzard franchise, they show up really only in the Warcraft universe, and they are completely different. I would actually put them more akin to sea elves, which if we could talk about them in a future video, you can get more detail. But basically, as the Warcraft story goes, the Naga used to be high elves, which were sort of the elf that all of the elves, well, night elves were the original elves, and so all of the other elves are sort of corruptions of the night elf, and the high elves were the ones who became addicted to this font of magical energy called the Well of Eternity. And there was a sort of Atlantis-type event in Warcraft's history that is told in the Well of Eternity series. And in that story, the Well of Eternity is sunken below the ocean, and those that were close to it were transformed by the magic into a race of Naga. They are these sort of snake-like creatures. They often have multiple arms. The women are powerful spellcasters. The men are these like brutal things. They're a very common occurrence within the Warcraft universe. If you played Warcraft 3, they show up in the Frozen Throne expansion, and in World of Warcraft, they're everywhere. Apparently, they have some sort of loyalty or some sort of corruption to an old god, which in the Warcraft universe are these sort of elder gods. They're kind of like the old gods from like Lovecraft. They're very tentacly and eyes and horror and corruption and that kind of thing. although they also take orders from a leader of them named Queen Ajara, who had been elusive for quite some time, but more recently in the Warcraft storyline, it seems to turn out that she's alive. And they do all sorts of crazy things, like there was a group of Naga that became refugees along with Illidan Stormrage to the Outlands, the Burning Crusade place. And in the Burning Crusade, they have a major plan to siphon all of the water out of Outlands and bring it to their one area so that they could have the monopoly on all the water, which brave hero in an MMORPG shut down. Later on in Wrath of the Lich King, they are responsible for trying to melt the ice caps, and you have to stop them very early on in one of the first zones in the game. Oh, and in the Diablo universe, there's apparently an axe named after it in Diablo 2 that's apparently useless. That's all I could find. And there's some references to them in the Warhammer setting as well. There's references that there are Naga, that they are sea creatures, sea serpents of some kind, but there's not a lot of details. And in Warhammer 40k, it's only used as the name of one of the Tyranid fleets. So I thought I would add to this list of settings to talk about how this race works in my setting, just to show what kind of creative things I've tried with it, give you some more inspiration. Creator's prerogative, right? In my own setting, I decided to take a little bit of that Forgotten Realms thing, with the idea of them having a progenitor race that's similar to the yuan-ti, and I decided to make it my own. And so in my setting, gods have a way of functioning that they're beholden to the beliefs of their believers. Gods are made by humanoids, not the other way around, and they are fueled by belief, but not by knowledge. So they are always trying to manipulate the world in order to create more followers who believe in them but don't know that they exist. So something like a cleric is taking one of their most devout followers and giving them knowledge, so weakening themselves significantly in order to be a vassal of them in the material plane in order to give them power. It's sort of a calculated risk, an investment, if you will. And in the deep history of my setting, there was a goddess named Ket, who is depicted as a feathered serpent, because there's a lot of Aztec mythology in my setting. And the story I have is a little bit taken from the origin story of the Zerg and the Protoss from StarCraft, but I've adjusted it a little bit. So one of the things that shows up is that once creatures in my setting become powerful enough that they start to fancy themselves as gods, they try to create life, which, as I said, they don't create life, life creates them. And so every time they try to create life, there's usually something funky that happens. It's very dangerous. The dragons created the Dragonborn, and the Dragonborn turned on them. That was a whole crazy story for them. Ket tried to make her own race of creatures, and she made the Naga. And she liked the Naga. You know, snake goddess, snake creatures, what could go wrong? And through the Naga, she managed to inspire some believers in the material plane, some humans. So the Naga acted as sort of her divine guardians on Earth, her like angels. She actually has like real angels called Coatl, but we'll talk about them in a Coatl video because they're in the Monster Manual too. She began to be worshipped by some humans, and those humans wanted to become more and more like her, and so they did things like perform horrible dark magic to transform themselves into the snake people that would eventually become the yuan-ti. And as I told you, the gods are driven by the believers, not the other way around. And that includes things like the nature of the gods and the domains. They have some awareness over this, but basically, if you're worshipped as the god of fertility, you become a fertility god over time. If you're worshipped as a god of good people, you're going to become better. If you're worshipped as a god of evil, you're going to become worse. And as the yuan-ti started to practice this dark magic to transform themselves into snake people, their worship of Ket started to take a very dark turn, and Ket could feel herself being manipulated into a darker path by the yuan-ti, basically fueling her power. And she was so abhorred, she thought that it was such an abomination what they were doing to themselves that she abandoned them, stopped responding to their calls. She abandoned the Naga as well and went into hiding. Eventually, the yuan-ti turned on Ket and started to curse her name, at the same time hoping that she'd come back someday. So there's this sort of like love-hate relationship going on between the yuan-ti and their former patron god Ket. Their frustration is taken out on their representations on the material plane, which would be the Naga. And so the Naga have various opinions about Ket, but the Naga basically are in a situation where there are very few of them left, and those that are trying to either rule in their own right, because they're immortal. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but if you kill a Naga, they come back to life after 1d6 days. So Nagas live forever, and they try to either rule, they try to hide in seclusion, and the yuan-ti are also always fighting to kill them, and the yuan-ti are also kind of scattered. So they're fighting an ancient blood feud, but there's so few of them left that this is in extreme slow motion now. And Ket had been, after losing her followers, had got demoted to demigod status, which means that you lack the cosmic powers of a god, but you basically get to go to the material plane as just a powerful entity. Typically, demigods try to get back to their godhood status, but that involves like manipulating culture and trying to get belief back in them going. And Ket has been doing that by trying to start cults that worship her. The darker path has taken hold, and she's now more of a manipulative figure that is more worshipped by cults that are looking for power in a very Machiavellian sense. Something more akin to what you'd expect from like a Western depiction of a snake deity. And she no longer goes by the name Ket, but by the name of the Serpent Empress. So how would you play a Naga creature? Well, one of the things I think that you could have fun playing with is that there are very different concepts of what snakes represent in culture. People in the West, people who look like Mr. Ghostface here, are more accustomed to Western culture, which is where snakes are very much given a biblical look. They are duplicitous, deceitful creatures that are evil in nature, coming from the whole origin story of the Bible and the Genesis and all that kind of thing, with the whole temptation of Eve and everything like that. So there is that, and realize that when you're doing that, that is a very Western concept. But I like playing with the idea because in Eastern cultures, in India, in China, and in Southeast Asia, there are depictions of the Naga, which is where the term comes from in Sanskrit, which depicts Naga as these benevolent, semi-divine protectors of the gods that are depicted as cobras. And that's really cool. But then also, you have the snake gods that are worshipped in pre-Columbian Americas, which are, these divine creatures of the sky, like Quetzalcoatl, and you can play around with all these different aspects. And what I tried to do to make things interesting is kind of blend them all together. So there's the divine creatures, the semi-divine creatures, and the duplicitous stuff, and it's all tied together. But remember that there are different ways to embrace snakes as an icon within a story, and undermine that if you can, or just, tease it a bit. If you're going to be playing with Nagas in your story, it's fairly likely you're also going to have yuan-ti showing up in that story. They're sort of direct enemies of each other. So either the Naga is going to be an evil Naga that you're going to want to take out because it's being a authoritarian monster trying to gather slaves and get revenge, or it'll be a benevolent one that might charge you to fight the yuan-ti, or the yuan-ti might charge you to fight a Naga. These kinds of things will show up quite often. It's a very easy rivalry to set up if you're looking for conflict within an upcoming story that uses a Naga. And when you're role-playing a Naga, keep in mind that they are immortal. The only thing that can actually kill a Naga, that can prevent it from being resurrected, is a wish spell. So that means that if you were to play a Naga, they have the wisdom of living for possibly multitudes of thousands of years. And on top of that, they would have a reckless combat style, because even if there's a slight chance of them winning, if they die, they just come back. So why not throw everything you have at an issue? So a Guardian Naga as a quest giver might be interesting, but a Guardian Naga as a quest giver that also comes with you on the fight because they're reckless and they have nothing to lose, very, very fun and interesting. And that means that you can give them a big, nasty monster that have this big guardian cobra to help them out, which could be really fun. Because they live forever, they also have no worries about deadlines or anything like that. So keep in mind that Naga can make plans that take centuries to come to fruition. So they've, wheels within wheels within wheels. So a Naga would probably have very, very long-term plans, and your players could have a small part of that plan. As far as how they play in combat, they're quite versatile. They have a lot of health. They have a bite attack that does a significant amount of poison damage if they fail a Constitution saving throw. On top of that, they also have a pretty respectable amount of spells. They're a pretty powerful monster to fight. And so, honestly, the tactics that you use can be completely up to the Naga. You can be one that tries to amass minions and keep a distance, like a Spirit Naga, and avoid biting if possible. Or you could be one that's really scrappy because they can't die and they do like 45 poison damage on a failed Constitution saving throw. So like, go hog wild. Play it however you think the Naga would play it. I also believe that the Guardian Naga are the ones that can actually also spit their poison attack. So they even have a ranged attack if they want to use that instead. And then of course there's the Bone Naga, which would be the pretty tough to create monster that a yuan-ti group might throw at you. And so if I were to use a Bone Naga in a fight, it would be in a fight against a lot of yuan-ti. And I would imagine because of the difficulty of creating a Bone Naga that the yuan-ti would probably set it up as sort of their big boss monster that they throw at only the deadliest of enemies. Say something like a party of adventurers rampaging through their temple. Think of it like a Rancor type thing. Something that they set off and use for the deadliest situations. It's like their trump card. Again, I mentioned if you want something that's more akin to like the Naga from Warcraft, I would say hold on until we're talking about sea elves, then make evil versions of them. And one thing that isn't in the D&D monster manual and not in a lot of the discussions of D&D, but are from the real folklore roots of Nagas that you could use for your own work, is that in Hindu mythology, they can turn into humans, or at least humanoid type creatures. And a Naga that is benevolent, has lived for a long time, maybe can turn into a person, can polymorph itself into a person. That is a thing that you could consider doing. They also are amassers of magical research and typically have protection over powerful magical artifacts or location. So your Guardian Naga or your Spirit Naga should probably have some sort of mission involved. As I said, Guardian Nagas could be protecting a region against evil creatures. They could be doing magical research in order to solve some problem that they are trying to figure out, or they could be guarding magical artifacts. A Spirit Naga is doing the same thing, but usually also comes out on missions of revenge. So play with that a little. You know, you always need treasure for your players, and so a Guardian Naga could maybe bestow them a powerful magical item for completing an important task for them, and an evil Naga, you know, you might just be able to loot them as part of your successfully taking down this nasty creature. And yeah, that's the Naga. I am really surprised I was able to talk for so long on such a peculiar creature. If you want to have me talk about a certain type of monster or class or race or really anything from the D&D world and give you this kind of treatment, just put it down in the comments. And if you want to stick around and see future ones, I would really recommend you subscribe. This channel is on its second video and already has 100 subscribers, so it's doing something right. And of course, if you want to help with that, please share this video with your D&D friends. I see a lot of potential in this kind of channel, and I hope to see more people come out and enjoy the kinds of stories that come out of real folklore and hopefully inspire people to improve their own adventures. So yeah, that's a Naga. Anyways, everybody, have an amazing day. Take care.